American lady, and for allowing me to come and speak about diabetes. It's always nice to have that opportunity to share what we're here to do today. So I work for an organisation, or set up the organisation called Diabetes Safety Organisation. We are supporting companies and industry around diabetes safety and increasing awareness and understanding. So I don't like introductions, so I'll keep it small, but you'll learn more as I go along. So I'll share the slides. I'd much rather just start the slides. There we go. Let me get to that. Perfect. Everyone can see that all okay? Just brilliant. So as Angela said, we're going to cover off about diabetes today. We've called it the hidden epidemic because I don't think we really get a handle on the size of the problem or the impact of it. I think here we can see it's in the press a lot, particularly during this COVID period. We hear about it. There's often headlines, as we can see. These are just a selection. I'll need to update them at some point, just to show that it's regularly heard, but do we really understand the condition, what it is, what it does to our body, and the risk of it in a working environment? And that's what we're going to touch on today. Now, I know we've all been bombarded with statistics recently, so I've got one slide of statistics. Oh, she says that. There we go. Just to kind of demonstrate the risk and the size of the problem around diabetes. So we know there's 4.6 million people in the UK living with diabetes currently. There are 700 people a day diagnosed in the UK. Obviously, during COVID, that hasn't been the case. So we know that pre-COVID, 1 million people, so 1 million of the 4.6, are living with diabetes but undiagnosed. And this comes back to the reason between our title of the hidden epidemic. And it'll come clear why it matters for those who haven't been diagnosed. So 1 million before COVID, 700 a day. So it would be wise to suggest there are now more living with diabetes who don't know it. There's 12.3 million people further at risk of diabetes. If you were paying full attention to the previous slide, it said 13.6. These numbers change depending on who does the statistics, as we know about numbers, but those numbers are available. And I think about a month ago, a really sad statistic came out, and that was that 6,836 children now have type 2 diabetes in the UK. So what was considered a older person's condition was perceived it took long time for the body, for type 2, not for the body not to have worked for the damage or whatever caused it to have done its job, and was perceived as delayed or older onset of a diabetes, is now being seen in over nearly 7,000 children in the UK. The worries we've got to understand about that is that they're going to have it for significantly longer. It's going to impact workforces. We're seeing it now in 18 and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds much more commonly. So the impact on workplaces is going to be there. And on top of that, if they've had it for significantly longer, there's going to be increased risks and the complications that we will look at as well. So I think it's something really to take note that this isn't going away anytime soon. Diabetes is the leading cause of blindness in the working population. Is 170 amputations a week in the UK, which are staggering numbers. I don't show any nasty feet, but if you ever want to be put off your food, have a look online about diabetic feet. They're pretty gross to see, whether that's a toe or a lower limb entirely, but they are serious numbers. And again, these have risen during COVID because people haven't been presenting to the GPs. So we're now seeing far more complicated feet and increases in amputation rates. And I am sorry to say, gentlemen, but I will pick on you a couple of times. 75% of men who have diabetes do suffer erectile dysfunction. It is a conversation you can imagine when I go on construction sites or any site and talk to the lads in the sheds. And ladies, we're not exempt from diabetes, but this isn't our statistic. It does get conversations going, as you can imagine. They're my stats. So, what is diabetes? In its simplest explanation, diabetes is just a sugar intolerance. So if you've got a biscuit with your cup of tea hidden behind a camera that I can't see, if you eat that biscuit and you don't have diabetes, your blood sugars will rise, your body, the organ, the pancreas, will produce insulin, and it will pull your blood sugars safely down and keep all your blood sugars in a nice level. So if you haven't got diabetes, be a bit grateful whilst you eat your biscuit. If you have, take your medicines and look after yourself and have one less. So what we have to understand about diabetes is that the pancreas, the organ that produces insulin, now is either not working well or not producing enough insulin. So the easiest example I've got, so I'm based in Birmingham. If I drove to London in my car and stayed in first gear, I presume none of you would be surprised, nor would my other half, that the car engine would be smoking. And you'd say, well, that was ridiculous, you need to change gears. If I drive back, change gears, do the dutiful thing, take the handbrake off, do a good job of driving, hopefully the engine will be all right and I won't get in trouble at home. So now if we use that analogy for the pancreas or for your body, if you keep pushing on the organ, and we'll see what causes it in a little bit, and you keep pushing on that organ, at some point the red light will come on or it'll smoke and it'll give you a warning sign. Now that's pre-diabetes. That's the body saying, hey, back off a little bit, I'm struggling to work, I'm not coping as well as I could do. If we continue to ignore that smoking engine and push, and or the organ isn't capable, because for some people diabetes will just happen, it's not necessarily a lifestyle choice or a factor, even though the NHS seem to hammer that home, that actually the organ doesn't work, then we drop into type 2 diabetes. So we can see on this, diabetes is a spectrum. So pre-diabetes, and this is all about type 2 at the moment, we'll come to type 1 in a minute. Pre-diabetes is a warning light or a signal. And we can see from those previous slides that there's 12.6 million or 13 million, depending which stats we look at, people at risk or increased risks of diabetes. So they're at risk and up to pre-diabetes. Then if you go and get diagnosed, and it's a magic number of 48 millimoles is the NHS's number to tip into being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, then we've got another spectrum. So we've got from just diagnosed, maybe manageable by lifestyle, maybe possible to reverse if caught early, and or your body can heal or cope with it. It might not, right up to the point where type 2s end up on insulin. So as diabetes is progressive, as the body struggles, you may need more support by different medications. They can start quite steady supporting your body, right up to the stronger meds like glyphosate and then insulin, where you actually do the job externally for your body. And these medicines will matter shortly, not entirely in a moment. And then for type 1s, that is arguably a very different condition. So people living with type 1, that's only 5% of those 4.6 million. So it's a much smaller percentage, but it's a very different condition. It's caused by an autoimmune. So the pancreas fully stops and people have to work out what they eat and then inject against it. So they basically regulate their own blood sugars externally. Not easy. Temperature can affect it. It's a really challenging thing. And in a workplace, it's about understanding, if you're the health and safety manager, the different types of diabetes so that you can appropriately talk to them. So someone who's type 1, you shouldn't eat cake. That would be like saying someone who is well. In fact, anyone can eat cake. There's consequences, but for a type 1, they just need to inject because that's what they have to do against everything that they eat, the carbs that they eat. So if we can understand that, I think there's better communications in the workplace. And you'll now start to see, and what is exciting for type 1s as time moves on, the sensors like Theresa May had on her arm and other people, they're constantly monitoring. So they don't need to keep finger pricking, which we know can be painful, and testing their blood sugars. They've got sensors. And eventually the technology, hopefully, is that the pumps or the way that they inject their insulin will talk to their glucose monitors. So hopefully there'll be some really clever technology to make life a bit easier. I'm not sure why I shared that, but information is good. So that's really what diabetes is. That kind of shows the spectrum. And I think it's really important, whether you have the condition, whether you're talking to people with it, whether you're a manager, that you understand those nuances. And that's something we do provide, and also we can support with, because I think it provides a different conversation in the workplace. Again, going back to why we called it the hidden epidemic, these are the symptoms. These are type 2 predominantly that we'll talk about. We'll touch on type 1, and when I do, I'll demonstrate the two differences. But you can see a lot of these we can put down to a good night out, now that we're allowed to, nagging wives, husbands, long days, kids are up all night. Of course, I'm shattered, so I drank a load of caffeine because I was trying to keep myself awake. I have kids. Then of course I got thirsty, and then I went to the toilet. So these are symptoms that we know people will push away. And I apologize again, gentlemen, but you are tinkers for not turning up for GP appointments or thinking, oh, it's okay. And we know that men present less regularly to GPs. And there is a perception that that million plus undiagnosed could be a higher percentage of men. Now, I don't mean to be here as another nagging woman, but I would love it if we could encourage people to go and get tested. The sooner we find out, there's more we can do, and we'll see that shortly. So these are the symptoms. If you think you've got them, or if we can, what we're trying to do in working environments is share this so we can get more people who think they have them tested. So you can either go to, you can go, if you've got occupational health in your company, they might do that for you. Some pharmacists do it, and GPs will definitely test, and they do what's called a HbA1c test, where they will take the average of your blood from the last 3 months and see where you're at with your numbers. It's a really easy, simple blood test. Now, if you catch diabetes early, for some people, it is reversible. You see a lot of that now. It's a recent thing that they've said that we can reverse diabetes. It's like the car engine, caught early, and I haven't driven to London too many times in first, the engine's salvageable. It's not the same for everybody. There are genetics, there's heritage, there's all sorts of challenges, but get tested. If you get it early, you might be able to reverse it. And certainly you'll definitely be able to slow down the risk and the complications that come from it, which we know are amputations, eyes, and for you gentlemen, manhood. So please do go get tested if you've got any concerns, or you know people who should. Nag them too. Now, I think it is still important to state that I believe there's still a stigma around diabetes. From the work I've done on sites and in industry, on the ground, from the stuff that you see in the press and the media, the NHS always say that, you know, the NHS are trying to do the right thing, but sometimes I think it comes across as, you know, it's your own fault, you've eaten this. There's so many factors that can influence this onset of diabetes. We know that sugar or the wrong foods and processed foods can. So people straight away go, it's my own fault. But actually, we know stress has a huge implication on diabetes because of the mix of the two hormones, cortisol and insulin. There's huge evidence to show that shift work in and of itself, and there's huge research been done with Birmingham University and on a global scale at the moment to look at whether shift work alone could be the cause or a trigger of diabetes. We know that genetics play a role. We know that heritage plays a role. There are many factors. And I think if we could get this information across, people might be more willing to come forward and share that they have the condition and not feel that they're going to be judged or there's a stigma around it's because of what I eat or it's my own fault, because I don't think that's true at all. We're all doing the best we can with what we've got. And I've certainly experienced as well a lack of want to come forward. I was on one site once, and a gentleman had diabetes, hadn't informed his employer. He hadn't been asked directly, so that was his rationale behind it. But he was really fearful he'd lose his job. He was the only breadwinner. We have to recognise in that situation, if he comes forward, he has lack of knowledge of whether it is a risk to his job, so really would rather not say. But he was behind machinery. So what are those safety risks, which we're going to look at in a minute? So I think really we've got to recognise what are those preventions. And I know this is the same with the mental health, fabulous work that's been done across industry at the moment. I know there's a lot to think about, but I think it's that time that we have those conversations. It comes off the back of mental health. I think there's a lot that we can do quite quickly and quite effectively around this messaging. So whistle stop tour this morning of diabetes. Oh, I did have a foot. I apologise. I forgot it was on this slide. I do have a foot. Please close one eye if you don't like bad feet. So this is my point about getting diagnosed early. Complications. So one of the challenges that we see around diabetes is that some people present maybe having had diabetes for 10 years, and they present with often the complications. And we can see here complications begin 5 to 6 years before even diagnosis, because remember the symptoms, they're not hard to see. They're hard to see, they're easy to put away. So people live with this. Blood sugars stay high. So if you imagine a glass of sugary water and you dropped a dull coin in, what would happen? Now, if I was in a room, I'd let you answer, but you're all on mute, so I'll answer for you. It shines. One lad told me it would sink. He was a class act. So now we've got a shiny coin. We've got to ask, if sugary water will shine a coin, what's it doing inside? And again, I've been around a while, so no, it doesn't shine our insides, team. It rots them. So what happens is when sugar starts to work on tissue, left too high for too long, it causes that erosion or the damage to the nerves for the eyes and the erectile dysfunction. Or as we can see here, think if we get a cut, the body can't heal it because the sugar levels are too high. And this is where these horrible complications start, whether that's something we've banged our foot in a workplace, whether we can't feel our feet. Those who are undiagnosed and have maybe lived with 10 years may not have sensation in their feet, yet they're jumping on a forklift truck, unbeknownst risk to anybody. Kidneys are also another problem. We've said about the feet. There is an increased risk of heart attack and strokes. It's not a great story unless we take care, we manage our condition. And it's not something though that is unmanageable. And I think that's the thing that I'm passionate about, is raising awareness, and let's get the diagnosis and get the safety side done and make the simple changes. And we'll look at one of my simple changes shortly. So 6 in 10 people have no symptoms when they're diagnosed. I think that's quite an interesting statement. No symptoms, or so mild we don't see them. And I think that's hard because we crack on with life. We all ignore those little aches and pains. I know I certainly do. A quick couple of paracetamols with a bad back, we're away. What are we doing? Are we hiding from those, or do we need to go and get the test? And again, I do encourage that we look at that and go forward if we need to. So we've looked at the risks if we don't. We've looked at the kind of complications. And these so far, we've talked about high blood sugars. What happens when our blood sugars are high? What happens inside the body? We're going to touch now on low blood sugars. A hypo is a low blood sugar reading. Now, not always, but most of the time, this will come about because of the medication, which is the insulin predominantly. Sometimes a gliptizide, they're strong medications. They can cause what's called a hypo, where someone acts drunk, blacks out. They have, and all of the symptoms you can see there would be very different for everybody. Now, in this situation, they need to be treated. First aiders should be treated on it. We do have training videos on how to deal with hypos. If anybody wants them, they're free. We have access to those. We have had done. And we encourage organisations to think about having a hypo box. I normally have them, but I'm in the wrong building today. Have hypo boxes or gels for those who are on insulin. What would happen if they have a hypo, their blood sugars drop, they need instant sugar, not chocolate because it's got too much fat, it doesn't get into them fast enough. It's always been the classic orange juice, Lucozade. Lucozade doesn't have enough sugar these days, thanks to the world trying to be healthy. So glucose gels are great, and they can also get big boxes, which I think are orange box about this big, next to first aid kits or defibs, just to raise awareness that if someone had a hypo, we know what to do, and give that confidence, and also say, look, we know about diabetes, come forward. So these are something just to be aware of. And also we know people on insulin, if it's hot, it could be a problem. If we've got people up on those cranes on a hot day, what are the risks? And we'll look at driving in a minute because that will come back to it. It's not all doom and gloom, I promise. We've got a good outcome at the end. So that's really looking at the condition in and of itself and the day-to-day living. And then in terms of the workplace, what are the impacts of diabetes? So we'll start with, remember the scale at the top end where people are on insulin. So type 1s and type 2s on insulin. So the risk of diabetes, because of what we just talked about, the hypos, is a sudden loss of consciousness, impaired awareness, concentration. They can act, as we just said, drunk or, pass out. Coordination, best example, when you need to eat, if you've missed breakfast or you had chocolate and then 2 hours later you hit a low wall, you think, oh, I just feel awful. Your blood sugars are low for you. A hypo is when it goes even lower than that. That's the best explanation we can give for you, is that really horrible. And you just think, oh, my screen's gone a bit funny, and you're trying to sort all that and then some is what a hypo is, and when they go down. And that's the sort of risks that we're faced with if someone's not had the chance to either have a break or regulate, or something's gone wrong on their balance on that day. And under it, DVLA regulations, there's set testing, which we've got a slide next on. So they're one end of our health and our safety aspect to think about. And then the others are the undiagnosed. Now, there's plenty of very well managed people. So, we mustn't brand everybody. We're just highlighting risk areas at the moment. So for the undiagnosed, as we said, it might have had up to 10 years, could have lack of sensation in their feet. They're jumping on machinery, their foot slips. Oh, couldn't feel my foot. Why would you? You can't feel it. Balance and coordination, awareness. So the undiagnosed, the best example would be Christmas Day. I don't know about you, I've got little kids. I eat the sugar with them first thing in the morning at 4 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, I'm as high as a fairy. We've eaten all the chocolates, presents are open, ready to go to bed. That sensation, I'm going to miss when they're older, we don't get to do that. But that sensation is the undiagnosed, their blood sugars are high. And I think they're the two ways to try and understand what people are experiencing. Now, again, if they are undiagnosed, they can't tell you they've got the condition because they don't know they have it. Have we got safety aspects covered in a workplace, whether they're behind machinery, whether they're working with other people, what are they doing? I don't know what you all do, and I'm not very good. So cranes and big vehicles are about as good as I get on technical, because I drive in first gear, don't forget. So driving and diabetes. DVLA regulations, as Ray knows, aren't straightforward, and not every diabetic specialist nurse, Ray and I were talking, not every diabetic specialist nurse knows the answers, do they, Ray? So with driving and diabetes, it's all about your fitness to drive, and that is what they base it on. If you are on insulin, you have to test 2 hours before driving and every 2 hours whilst driving. Now, the thing we're trying to work on, and we're working with the British Safety Council on as well, is trying to lobby the fact that these are DVLA, these are regulations for the road. They don't necessarily, although should apply to sites, manufacturing, warehousing, where machinery is used. Someone could come in, be very good, test every 2 hours on the roads as they drive to work, and then sit behind, I'm going for my crane again, a crane, and not test again for the day for 8 hours. What are those risks? Do staff, health and safety, occupational health, do they know what they should be monitoring, and are people doing that testing? So again, none of it's a problem. There's no blanket bans in the UK, but we must ensure that safety has been taken into consideration when we look at machinery and insulin particularly, but also those undiagnosed. Have you as an organisation done everything that's reasonable and practical to ensure that knowledge is known across your sites? You can see I spend time with lawyers. We don't have any evidence or facts on industry accidents. It was led to believe that the lorry up in Glasgow went through. The driver had diabetes, but it's vicarious liability. Nothing's come. No further information is available, so now it's hearsay. So we don't know whether that was caused from diabetes. We know accidents do happen in workplaces, but is not necessarily reported as diabetes. So it's very hard to demonstrate from our point of view that this is happening, but the organisation I talked to do know some is. But on the road, if an accident was to happen, you can see here that actually it is a criminal offence and people do get put in prison if they have had a fatal accident, they've caused a fatal accident, and they can't demonstrate on their blood testing machines that they've tested at the appropriate times. So it is something that we need to be aware of, and I think that it will change in industry as the statistics get worse around diabetes and the management of it. So we'll move on to some more chirpier stuff to finish off and round up before it's tea and biscuits. As an organisation, we've set up a charter. Really, we recognise we're opening a can of worms for some people. Many organisations have stuff in place. For some, this might be new. For others, there might be bits I think, oh, I didn't know that. We've tried to set up a charter for organisations to see what is good practice, best practice, better practice. Gratefully, IOSH support, as you can see on there, that they're supporting this charter. And if you want more information, we can send some afterwards. And I think there's a link on one of our last slides around looking at promoting awareness and understanding. Have you got somewhere, if someone is on insulin, have they got somewhere to put their sharps, especially if they're remote working? If they are remote working, have you got the right availability of glucose or the sugars for them to pick up on, like we talked about hypogels? Have they got somewhere to put insulin if it's hot? There's lots of little nuances, and they're all here if you want any support. And for me, I think it's about not the medical side, but the bit before, raising awareness, increasing the understanding, and allowing people to know we're an employer who are happy to support you. Come forward, we'll make this better. And I think that is not always easy, but we're here if you want any help with any of that or further conversations, we can do that. Healthy bits. Finish your biscuit if you are, because it's coming your way. So what can you do? What can you do? What can employers do? What can be done around diabetes? Often the messages are the very same. It all comes back to health. I know many organisations do wonderful work around health, mental health, trying to improve fitness. There's gym membership. There's a multitude. So whatever you're doing is amazing, and each bit will make a difference. So we know sleep, improved sleep can help with diabetes. We know decrease in stress. That doesn't mean give your job a rest, but how do you take your moment? Less processed food. So 95% of processed foods contain sugar, and particularly hidden ones. So we encourage less processed foods, and then also increase movement. And this was one of my crazy middle of the night ideas. If you get up and out your chair 20 times, 5 times a day, 5 days a week, and that's 52 weeks a year, that would be 26,000 squats a year, which is definitely more than you do in the gym. So all you have to do, knees permitting, get up and down in your breaks, quick 20 reps, 5 times a day, and you'd be smashing it. Would it make a difference by the end of the year? You'd probably hate me for the first month with leg ache, but as it's settled, you'd be having a great time. So that's one option. But one of the things that we do much more, because I think just the last couple of points on this slide, 95% of people go back to weight clubs. So if losing weight, eating healthy, doing the right thing was easy, 1, we'd all do it past the 13th of January. And 2, slimming clubs wouldn't do so well with 95% return rates and huge profit margins. We have to recognize we all have good intentions. Life takes over. I work in an office with people, they bring biscuits in, of course we eat them. I've got kids, they eat Haribo. I love Haribo. It's a weakness. So, we all have our things. And I think one of the big parts for me is, how do we make a small difference, or we think it's small, but actually it would have a big impact. One of the things we're doing is the One Less challenge. We've got poster campaigns we can support you with. If you put sugar in your tea or coffee whilst I've been chatting, and you had 1 less sugar, 6 cups a day, it's 1 kilogram less of sugar a month. So by the end of the year, that'd be 12 bags of sugar. People go, I wouldn't make a difference. That would make a significant difference to your health, to your blood sugar levels. 1 pint less a night. One woman on a construction site said to me, I'll have it in the morning. So I don't think that's the answer, love, but we'll go with it. But 1 pint less a night, 1 pint less, 2 nights a week. We're not saying don't have it. We're just saying have 1 less. That'd be 104 pints less a year. So my challenge at the end of this is, what would you have 1 less of that could make a difference to you? Now, I can't have 1 less Haribo because it's way too small. So mine would be a packet less. I'll go with a kid's packet, but it might be the family packet. But what could you do that by the end of the year, if you sat and added it up, I mean, I appreciate I should get out more, but if you sat and added it up, what difference would it make? And I'll guarantee you it'll have an impact on your health and well-being. And we really encourage organisations to have that. It gets quite fun in the organisation, and we've got all the posters and campaigns if you wish. There is one ask, if I may, now that I've come to the end, and I will stop babbling. There's some here, I assume the slides could be shared, so I've put some live links for you for the DVLA, about driving. We're at the top if you want to find out more. What I really would love, we've set up a survey, it's this bottom link here, to try and find out more about people's understanding in the workplace. It's completely anonymous. It takes 1.5 minutes. We'll call it 2. But if you could fill that in, or encourage staff, anybody to fill that in, we're trying to collate data to find out how much people do know in industry around diabetes, about hypos, what would happen. I'd be hugely grateful. It would appear to be a lot harder to get people to fill surveys in than I anticipated. So Ray, I think if you're happy, I'll stop sharing. It's over to questions and to you, Ray.
To unmute, Ray, please.
Thank you. I have to say, as a type 2 diabetic myself, and I did notice from some of the questions that have popped up that there are other people here that are diabetic, mostly type 2. But I've finished up with wrist ache with all the questions that I've got. So we're going to have to take these as best we can. I'm going to start with the finished one. Hypostock gels are regarded as a food source and have an expiry date to monitor. Trained first aiders to only rub into the inside gum to avoid being accidentally bitten by the diabetic. Do you have a comment on that?
No, it's we've been working with the Commonwealth Games, actually doing hypo boxes with them, and yes, we know there's all hypo boxes would need to be restocked. They've put it down as part of their first aid kind of inventory like plasters and everything else. So yes, there is restocking to be done. Apparently sugar does go out of date, which is what it is. And there are different means of hypogels to be used. I think what that statement there, absolutely, that's one of the things, and one of the courses that I've seen that's recommended. It needs to be done by first aiders. So we've got the hypo training. I'm not medically trained to comment on exactly how it should go in. So I'm mindful of the line I walk along. But yes, we've got the training videos if people want it. And first aiders should know how to use that gel, but it does need to go on part of the list to be restocked.
Let's go back to the beginning now, and I know where this question came from, but I'm not going to shame the person. Where are we? Alcohol. What effect does it have on sugar? I think. Where are we? Lost the question now.
I can answer that one if you want whilst you look for it. So in terms of alcohol, it has a sugar content.
Yeah.
The thing around diabetes, everybody responds differently. So I was working in one area and a couple were on exactly the same insulin. When one had a mango, their blood sugars went skyrocketing, but loved them. And then the other, their partner had it and their blood sugars didn't change. So we do have to recognize everyone's different. You do need to monitor your own and watch what's happening so you know what affects you more or less. Alcohol will have an effect. Again, it will vary, but it will have an effect and you will see that it will rise. One of the things, I don't advocate necessarily drinking, I've got to be very mindful of my terms and conditions apply. But what you can do is if you have protein, so either plant-based proteins or meat if you're not a vegetarian, before you drink and after you have a drink, it will slow down the effect. So protein slows down sugar. So one of the things that I'm quite passionate about is that no matter what happens from this conversation, I'm still going to go and eat Haribo. I train on this all the time and I still don't do exactly the right stuff. And I'm sure when you all leave here, you're not going to be spot on perfect. If you are, let me know and tell me how you did it. But the point that we're looking at here is if someone's going to have a drink, could you have one less and could you slow it down with proteins? And that would be my advice. I'm not saying it's the ideal. The ideal is we're perfect. But in the reality, slow it down with proteins before, have like a meat and vegetable meal. And then if you're coming home from somewhere, have the chicken kebab meat without the chips and the bread, because that's sugar. It will slow it down. And then have one less wash you're out if that's what you're doing. So it's how you make things better is also a big part of what we advocate.
Next question. Do early warning symptoms need to be of concern in isolation, or does there have to be more than one present?
That's unique. I've not been asked that before. This is a difficulty, and I don't have a definitive, I'm afraid, on these sorts of questions. Some people don't really see them. Some people will put them down. My simplest answer is if you're unsure, just go and get a test. You are far better to ask for a blood test, find the answer, you're not thinking about it, and if you have got it, you can get it resolved quickly. Some people might only present with one symptom, some might present with all of them, some might not notice any of the symptoms because they've lived with it for so long and they weren't aware. So I would really, if it was anybody of my loved ones, I would just say, please just go and get tested, then we can know where we're at. And that's what I would encourage. If you're asking that question, it makes me think there's a reason to go and get a test. Sorry, there's no definitive on that one.
Next question. Should those with diabetes have eye tests more frequently due to particular sight deterioration?
So retinal screening is so important around diabetes. It's yearly unless you've been told otherwise. And again, you know, this is your body. If it was your car and the check light comes on, most of us go straight away. Not always if we're busy, but most of us go and get the check light done. Or if there's a little knock or there's a bang, we'd have it done. And yet, or if it was one of our children's or partners or parents, we'd tell them to go and check. I don't know why we, and I put myself in the camp, why we as individuals think, I'm fine, it'll be okay. These are our bodies. They need preserving. We need to take care of them. If you have any deterioration in your eyesight, I would book an appointment and just go and have it checked. Because if you've got a rise in your blood sugar and it's going at the back of your eye, they can look, they can see it, they can give you the meds and they can bring it back down and they can potentially save your eyesight. you know, this is your life. And I think if you're asking these questions to me, and I love them, keep coming with them, it says you've got a concern. Let's go and get it checked. Let's not leave it too long. You know, I'm not great with my car. I'd probably be the one that's owned and gave up. But, you know, I've learned not to, because I've damaged a car before. So, you know, we learn the hard way. But with our body, I can go buy a new car. We can't buy a new body. So I would say if you've had any change in eyesight, if you've got any concerns, go before your appointment, either via the GP or go and see an optician locally.
And there was an added bit to that, which in relation to sight deterioration. Should there be regular reviews with these colleagues to get any updates on their health and any potential hazard risks in the workplace?
Yes, is the short answer. I think when it comes to workplace, each organisation will need their own policies in place around each condition, or whether you specifically have a diabetes assessment and risk, and also the risk assessment for the work in which they're doing. If they have had eye deterioration or they've had changes, I think it's, again, that we hear it all the time, and I sincerely apologise, it's that open dialogue between the employer and the employee, and opening that conversation so they can come and share with you, and the appropriate stuff can be done. Obviously, if eyesight's change and they're doing, you know, if I'm on a computer sat at a desk, hopefully we're pretty good to go, other than it makes my eyes worse. But if that's then applied to my crane, because I really need to learn more about industry, you know, what are those risks? So it's that question of coming back to asking, what is their role? What are those risks? What's that relationship with the employer? And have you got the things in place to support them to be able to do the job safely and effectively?
Next question. Medical conditions are a confidential matter. An employer that uses an occupational health service may get a fit for duty statement regarding an employee and not know the person has diabetes. How do you overcome the confidentiality issue?
I'm smiling because that's why we use a big law firm, Gowling. So this question often comes up. And as with many of these, I don't have an answer for you. It is really challenging. So we work with Gowling on both employment law and the health and safety law, because it's out of my remit as a non-legal entity. If, from my understanding, and if you want to, whoever this is, if I can leave my email address in at the end, if you want more definitives, I can go get them for you. That's not a problem, and I can get these more defined answers from the professionals themselves. So please, if you want that, I can sort that out. Ray's got my email address. I'm happy for it to be shared, Ray, and people can directly contact me, and I can give these more definitive answers as a one-to-one. But from my understanding, it's whether it is deemed by your job and the roles, and what is specifically stated of how it has to be shared will define what that looks like. The work we're trying to do comes before this, in terms of this is in place and this is the legal duties and the legal responsibilities it should all follow through, of whether you require it, whether it's an essential, or whether it is only that they are fit for duty. And that should already be in place through risk assessments and policies. What we're saying as our organisation is we're trying to come in and say, let's talk about diabetes. Let's show them it's okay to talk about it. Let's share what it is, and share with managers or ambassadors or line managers more detail, so they know how to communicate and what to be asking. So there's an understanding there, and hopefully that will improve the lines of communication and potentially could avoid that. But then the legal side should be underneath it. And if you want that legal side, please, I won't name who said it, but please do send me an email afterwards.
Okay. Next question. Are there any recommendations on footwear for diabetic employees, and does anti-fatigue matting help?
I've never been asked that question. Oh, I like this today. So I think with footwear, if someone has diabetes, they should be getting yearly foot checks. Again, through COVID, we've seen lots of complications and problems. We've got backlogs. You can see a private podiatrist. They will run and check feet sensations. People living with diabetes should know about these. And there are footwears that can, maybe if things have got risk of dropping, if there's risk, obviously all your protected toe shoes and all of the hard shoes would be beneficial. But again, it's that conversation. Everybody, as we saw on that spectrum, one of the challenges around diabetes is it's a spectrum. So there might be someone who's recently diagnosed, very limited symptoms, actually feel quite well, they've changed their lifestyle, life's good, would not need the same as someone who now has a foot complication and can't quite feel the same sensation. So what we can't struggle is to be able to recommend you need to speak to that individual. And then if they have got foot sensation issues, they should be working with their specialist team to say, what do I need to wear? And if not, again, it's that conversation with them and or OcuHealth to say, what would be the best based on this individual in this role doing this job? So it's really challenging. And this is why we try and work with individuals on this one-to-one with our medical and legal team, because the difficulty around diabetes is it's not a black and white condition. It is very a spectrum of where someone's at. And again, get this conversation up front, people understand the condition. Hopefully that dialogue will be a lot better and prevention can happen in advance.
Now, I've got a question of my own here. I know we briefly talked about this before. As somebody who was totally asymptomatic, and it was only because my son was getting all the things you were talking about, thirst, extra urination, and all the rest of it. Can you just briefly touch on hereditary diabetes, for want of a better term? How common is it?
These are challenges today. Great question, Ray. I think genetics is such a new science. There are links that show that it's genetic, but there's also research been done to say, is it based on lifestyle that the family have followed? It's a real complex one. We know that ethnicity can have a variation and that BMI groups have a higher risk with a lower BMI. In terms of hereditary from family to family, the research is quite limited as in definitive research. It does look like there is a correlation. And when I work, so I have a charity and we work with people with diabetes, we do see that run, but it's more circumstantial than evidential. And the genetics research isn't high on that as yet. In terms of your question, I think I wanted to touch on when you said about asymptomatic. I do think one of the important things, we do have our cars, I like my car analogy, but we do have our cars MOT'd. I would often question, why are we not getting checked, especially as we age beautifully? Why are we not getting our engines checked and having those routines? For me, blood sugar tests should be a routine as we age, particularly if we have any concerns or reservations or we hit any of them. There is a tool, if you have any concerns still, want to use it in work. Diabetes UK have a risk assessment tool. It's free of charge. I don't know if I put it on the slide or not, but it's a free of charge tool that can be used to allow people to start to challenge whether they have or not, or whether it would be worth having a test. And if it's not on there, I can certainly send a link across to you.
I'm going to ask one final question. There are others, but we are beginning, I think, to run out of time and putting you under pressure there.
I don't mind.
Are workers under an obligation to tell employers of their health conditions, such as diabetes?
Not under the Equality Act. So again, it will define what your job role looks like and what you've defined, what the position is and the circumstances it's put under. And this is where, when I first got into, I got into this, I was doing work in the NHS around diabetes education. They said, men don't present. I said, well, we should be going out. So I kind of started to do talks on sites and realized that this is an area that's very undone, started working with legal firms and kind of came to life with where we are today. And that is one of my still big areas that we have sat with employment lawyers for a while. No, they don't have to under certain circumstances. And for the fourth answer to this question, I apologize, is that point of saying, how do we increase awareness and understanding? How do they know they're not going to lose their jobs? How do we help them come forward and talk openly, like we've done the mental health are working on? How do we get that to happen, to get around that difficulty of where, no, there isn't an obligation necessarily under the Equality Act to inform, unless, like with some of the offshore jobs, they do have to do all their full medicals, and there'll be certain roles that do require it. But if not, there isn't a specific requirement for them to do that, which leaves this very grey area as health and safety.
Thank you for that.
Can I be rude, Ray? And just, I saw some numbers of somebody on with their blood sugars, whoever it was, what an incredible change. They've really just, I saw the questions going through, someone has really dropped their blood sugars, and whatever you did, congratulations. It's always wonderful to see people making big health changes, and shows how, I'll share numbers because I don't think anyone knows who it is. They've dropped, so 48 is diagnosis. They had a 65, it's millimoles a mole, they're just numbers, but 65, and it's dropped down to 35. So an incredible, and it shows that these things are doable. So whoever that is, congratulations, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you for that. I say there are other things like, how do they access your information? Is it on your website? And I guess it is there, is it not?
Yeah, it's on the website. It's on the top of the slide. And Angela and all of you that organise it, I'm happy for my email address to be shared, so that if anyone does want to get in touch and ask anything directly and get those definitives from today as a one-to-one, I'd be only more than happy to do that.
Well, thank you for that. You certainly educated me a little bit more about my diabetes. So I'm going to hand it back to Angela now, because I think you've answered just about every single question. And I've not seen so many questions asked of a presenter before. So well done, I say. Thank you.